Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I'm a graduate assistant at the KU Wingspan. Today we're going to talk about creating poster presentations. So the Wingspan is part of a larger Center for Learning and Writing Support. We offer support services in these 4 different categories listed on the slide. We have writing support through undergrad and graduate one-on-one writing consultations to brainstorm, draft, and revise writing projects. We have tutoring services, which includes one-on-one and small group tutoring for a variety of courses. We also have supplemental instruction where SI leaders provide study strategies for note-taking, organization, and test preparation. Lastly, we have peer academic coaching, which is individual and group support to help students set and achieve goals and develop behaviors, habits, and strategies for success in college. We're going to cover several topics today. First, we'll briefly discuss the writing process because it helps to know what you're doing as you do it. Then, we will dive into how to organize your poster and develop your ideas for a presentation. We'll next turn to design elements and visuals, and then examine several sample posters to discuss how effective they are. We will close with a discussion on how to present your research verbally with your poster as a guide. Let's look at how to draft the poster content. Poster presentations are an interesting genre because you're most likely not creating them from scratch. You've done some research, likely formally written it up, and now you need to translate your work into an easily digestible and highly visual format. This means that you'll need to cut down from a lot of detail and context that's present in your writing and present a very streamlined version of your research. So before you start working on your poster, ask yourself these questions. First, who's your audience? Who will be looking at these posters? Are they fellow students, professors, industry professionals? Think about what they'll already know about your research and what you will need to explain. Also, consider what sort of things you will draw them to your poster. Out of all the potential posters in the room, how do you draw them? Now that you've identified who your audience is, what is the one thing you want them to learn? What is the single most important takeaway from your work? And building off of that, what are the 2 or 3 most important points of your work that supports that takeaway, that you need audiences to understand? Don't attempt to put your whole writing into the poster. Pare it down to the essential elements of your understanding. After you've identified what parts of your message are important, you can start drawing up some of the text for the poster. First, you should write a very brief abstract of your research, no more than 2 paragraphs, where you discuss what you set out to learn and your central findings. Somewhere in a prominent place on your poster, you should have your hypothesis or research question, so that the audience can know at a glance what you are researching. You also need to include some information, briefly about your methods, what kind of data did you collect, and how. Then you need to discuss your findings. What did the data tell you? How did you analyze it? Finally, discuss the limitations of your research, since you can't do everything in a single study, and point to ways other scholars can pick up your work and expand on it. Your research answers some questions, but what questions did it generate? As I discussed in the last slide, paring down your content to fit comfortably on a poster is a big task. For your work, think again about your audience. What do they know and what do they want to know? Then figure out what pieces of information are crucial to an understanding of your project and what can be left out. Things that can be included are your research question, methods, and major findings. Things like an extended literature review and specific examples can probably be left out. Also, be thinking pragmatically. How big is the poster? How much text can you fit legibly without the poster turning into a wall of words? Finally, think about how you want the poster to be organized. Columns of information, text broken up with visualized data can be effective. Ultimately, you want the audience to be able to tell where their eye should go next after they finish looking at one section. Next, let's look at some poster designs. So the title as the largest and most prominent text on the poster will do a lot of work in drawing people over to examine your work. The standard placement of a title is at the top of the poster, generally centered. When writing a title, do not type in all capital letters. This style is actually more difficult to read and understand. Instead, capitalize the first letter of most words. with the exception of most propositions and articles. Below your title, you will list yourself as an author, but may also have a list of other co-authors that helped during the project in a large font. If you're working with multiple people, make sure you've discussed the ordering of these people with your mentor. Generally, the order of the authors are decided from those that contributed the most time and energy to the project, followed by those who are in supportive roles, and then usually principal investigators. Along with author names, you will need to list their academic or professional affiliations. Using university logos is a great way to add a visual element to this section. In terms of setting up the layout of the poster, think about how the eye is going to travel across it. Where do you want people to look first, and how will you direct them? Most people read things like you read a book, top left to bottom right. If you want a different flow of information, consider putting arrows between the text boxes or numbering them to give the audience a strong sense of the narrative flow of the presentation. Another trick is to isolate the most important information like your hypothesis and put them in a spot in the poster that isn't crowded with other text or images. Try and save most of the nitty-gritty details for conversations with people who stop and look at your poster. Most viewers of your poster likely read from the top left to the bottom right, so it is a good idea to organize your content that follows this sort of outline visually. You can also use arrows, lines, numbers, or bullet points to guide the reader's eye. There are also some layout examples on this slide depending on if your poster will be in landscape or portrait mode. Think about using text boxes and columns to organize your information as well. Posters contain text, but they're also an inherently visual medium. Add visual elements like photos to appeal to the audience, or visualize your data into charts or graphs if possible, so your audience can get a firmer understanding of your numbers. Always use high-resolution images so things don't print pixelated, grainy, or fuzzy. Also make sure that your visuals are immediately relevant to the topic of your research and ideally the text that they are close to. Make sure your visuals do not require more than a short caption of explanation or context in order to be understood. Their purpose and how they relate to the topic should be apparent. When you design a poster, you also need to be very sure that you're branding it, so it's apparent that you were the researcher responsible. The most obvious way to do that is to have your name in a prominent place on the poster, like immediately under the title. Another good rule of thumb is to have a date somewhere so the audience know how recent this research is. If you're presenting at a national or international locale, it's a good idea to have your university affiliation listed somewhere, either the name of the school or the logo, so people familiar with academia might have a sense of the program that you come from. Finally, make sure you give credit where credit is due and have a brief bibliography of key sources in a bottom corner of your poster. This will strengthen your ethos as a researcher. Lastly, you will provide a reference section just as you do in a research paper. These can be listed in a small font in the lower section of your poster. A quick note about readability: size 96 font is generally good for titles, 36 for section headings, and 24 for body text. These aren't ironclad numbers, but they give you a sense of the size of things in order for stuff to be readable and consistent. Now let's take a look at poster templates and logistics. Now that you have an idea of what a poster should include, you will want to start the actual creation process. Posters are typically made in PowerPoint on a single slide that has been customized to the size based on the conference you are presenting at. Here's a template of a poster. Feel free to pause or take a screenshot here. On this slide, we are sharing a specific template example provided by KU so you can see what the final product might actually look like. You do not have to follow this exact layout, but something along these lines is generally expected. You can look at more examples later on for inspiration using the resources that we have later on. When it comes time to print your poster, we suggest talking to your mentor about where to do this. There are several places on campus that provide poster printing services, but one that is accessible to all students is located on the ground floor of the Kansas Memorial Union, across from the bookstore. We recommend printing your poster on computer paper first to preview it and make sure it looks good before getting it professionally printed. It is also a good idea to have your posters sent to the printers at least a week in advance from your conference travel date to ensure there is time to fix any problems that may arise. To prepare for your presentation, practice a 3-minute elevator speech with mentors, family, and friends. The more practice you do, the more comfortable you are at the conference. Here are some resources that can be helpful in your poster creating process. So that's all for the presentation. If you have any questions about the writing process or anything we talked about today, you can schedule a consultation with one of our writing consultants at writing.ku.edu. We have in-person, e-tutoring, and video conferencing appointments available, so you can choose the format that you feel most comfortable with. If you do come and see us, we are located in the Anschutz Library on the 4th floor. Thank you.